isolation repeated 0.01 weight.
But it seems like really what you'd want to try to do is that quantitative analysis. How important are stream crossings compared to the erodibility of the soil? And instead of arbitrarily saying we want them to have equal weights, you'd actually want to know how important each factor is.
I mean, we agree with that, but we didn't have that information at the time.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to work in a way where, under the assumption that we will never have that information, because we're trying to build something that can be applied pretty universally across the country.
Yeah, but I think soil erosion scientists do have a pretty good sense. I mean, stream crossings, from what I've read, are really an important factor because the road is right there, as opposed to you don't know if it's a certain distance away, how much gets filtered out, and it depends on how intensive the rainfall is. But for stream crossings are a really important factor. So at least you have the justification of knowing that they're more important than the others. So it's okay to give them a higher weight.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of what led to all this, is because we knew that intuitively, and yet when we were giving them, you know, when we say we had the other two at like 0.25, and then we gave stream crossing a weight of 0.5. And then we looked at the answers. When we looked at the output, we're like, well, wait, where's all the road segments that have stream crossings? They weren't showing up as priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would worry that the one that's at the top of your skewed distribution, then in a way it's not giving that enough weight, because instead of weighting that whole factor, you're weighting the factor less, but you're increasing the importance of the intermediate values.
Right. That's a really good point, and I think that one of the things that I'm realizing, and I remember reading a long time ago, is that when it comes to multi-criteria combinations like this and doing the normalizations, that there's no one perfect normalization. Every normalization is going to have with it its benefits and its costs, and that what's really important is to be able to communicate what are the benefits and the costs of any particular normalization. So in this case, the cost of doing this normalization is that the road segments that have a lot of road crossings are not going to have the relative skew compared to the road segments that have a medium amount of road crossings. And so that you would have to be aware of that in the final results. So I think that a disclaimer that goes along with each one of these. I think what we'll want eventually, I can see in our community practice, is that we'll probably want a toolbox of a variety of different normalizations, and with each normalization we could have a model builder tool that goes along with it, as well as maybe a wiki page that goes along with it that talks about why to use it, when to use it, what it does, and what its pros and cons are. And I think you just nailed it on the head with the con of doing this mid-value mean approach. Yeah, I think that's a good comment. If we were to follow up on this, and look at this a little bit more detail with the data, and maybe give a reprise 5 or 10 minute presentation in a month or 2 or 3. What are some questions people would have that they want us to dig into? Like, for instance, one that I already have right now is I really want to look at what that top value is on the map and see how many stream crossings it truly has, and what that data actually looks like, and get an idea of what that one is, maybe the next one down, and then the next one down, and see if we really are losing out on these most extreme stream crossings. Are there any other questions along those lines that people would like us to look into?
is
literature
just
at
having
all.
the ArcGIS output would be really helpful to show what that looks like under all these different alternatives.
Yeah, it really would be. And I had that prepped, but
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there's information in the literature about the number of stream crossings per unit length that would be helpful in identifying, where, that would help us in this normalization process. If we knew that more than X number of crossings per kilometer or per 10 kilometers or per some unit were particularly good or bad in different situations, it would help us normalize in such a way that we would capture certain threshold values. Now, I don't know if that kind of information is out there in the literature or not. Anne, you may be more knowledgeable on that literature, but it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and I have a feeling we might be able to be looking into that in the months to come, because there has been some dialogue on the email. I want to give Janet a chance to respond to that too, but I'm jumping in here because that really sparked something I wanted to communicate, which is that in the book, in Malzewski's book, that's pretty much the approach he talks about for doing the mid-value normalization process, is that you actually have an expert or previous literature that's helping drive what is the mid-value, what is the 0.5 value, and what are those different thresholds. So it asks you to do it for the 0.5 value, and then for the 0.25 value and the 0.75 value, and it asks you to base those on your expert knowledge or again the literature. And we were experimenting with this approach using the mean of the distribution to be the 0.5 value because of a couple reasons. One is that for the scope and time for the project involved, that was beyond the scope, was to go ahead and dig into all those things. But also more importantly, looking at the decision support systems as a whole, if you're looking at an entire landscape and looking at making management and a variety of decisions in which you're dealing with hundreds of criteria, there is some merit to trying to have some sort of standardized approach towards the mid-value method. So that's kind of why we were experimenting with that.
Just following on to that, John, there may be kind of a hybrid approach based on what you just said, plus using weights that aren't exactly 50-50, but maybe they're more 75-25, or they're not the 0.97, 0.3 scenario, and they're not the 50-50 scenario. They're somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Combined with picking a mid-value that's not the mean.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a hybrid of the two.
Yeah, I think that would be a good way of moving forward. And I think it would also address what Anne was talking about before, which is that that stream crossings in and of themselves are much more important than the soil type, as far as their overall impact. Yeah, and in fact, that also reminds me of another thing, is that any time you get into these types of normalization decisions and the weighting decisions, the standard rule of practice is actually is to show the criteria in more detail so people can understand these nuances. Because a lot of times, if you just give them the two nouns, stream crossing versus soil erosion, everybody has in their own mind the different methodologies for creating those metrics. So that's another best practice that we would have to implement.
I was just skimming through the literature review that Ben Riegel did last summer, and there may be, he got some materials from a Forest Service research station that specifically works on roads, and there might be some material in there that would be helpful.
Okay. Is that the, let's see, I'm wondering if that's the same person that Matt was looking at their methodology in helping design some of this. Matt was online for a while, but it looks like he's offline right now.
Oh, we're pretty familiar with this, especially Matt.
What's that?
I know I've shared documents with you before, but it was sort of after we applied the Eldorado situation. But no, Matt was involved in Ben's work. I've read it.
Yeah, I'm still on the phone. My connection's been lost, but I'm still on the phone.
Okay. So what was the name again, Ann? Ben Regal?
Ben Regal, he was the intern in North Carolina last summer, and he did a literature review that, he dug up a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily in his write-up that was on road erosion and thresholds, and there might be some stuff in there on the importance of stream crossings versus other factors.
Right.
But isn't that a question of how to weight stream crossings afterwards, and not a question of how best to do this normalization process?
I think it is. And I think that's kind of what Randall was saying, is we could do a hybrid approach where we do the normalization process to try and get the things on the same level, playing field mathematically, and then throw in our value judgments as far as the impact on the ground, as far as impact to the ecology, and that's where the weights.
Yeah, that's the real trick, because you want to get these things. You want to compare apples to apples when you're first running the model, and then have the ability afterwards to weight any of these factors any way that you want, depending on whether or not you're most concerned about stream crossings. If you have some extra information about the fact that none of the stream crossings are hardened, or you're looking at a certain threshold, but to get all of these components on an equal playing field first is what the trick is here, not trying to figure out what the ultimate weight is of that factor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I do think they're related, because it feels to me like the normalization procedure that you're choosing is partly to avoid underweighting the importance of stream crossings, to avoid having to give it a 0.9 weight compared to 0.1 for everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just trying to figure out a way to get the rating system. You think of it as a way to get the rating system the same for each of these. It's not, the problem is that the way that the computations are done, like Jen was explaining, there are a whole bunch of 30-meter cells, and most of those are going to say no stream crossing. And because of the way that's done, of the quirk of that system versus the metric for some of these others, you're going to just get a really low number. And it has nothing to do with the fact that stream crossings are less important or more important. It's just the way that the measure is calculated. So when you get to the end, it's always going to be a lower number than other factors where you're not getting a zero value for 90% of the 95%, 99% of the cells that you're looking at.
Right.
So it's not really a question of how important it is. It's a question of how do we just get the metrics to be equal in the end, and then we can weigh them later. But there are some questions of distribution where individual segments